It's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
What's your favorite scary movie?
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
What's up, everybody? Marva here, and on today's episode of Slashes in Sync, I'll be once again taking on this episode alone. I am giving MJ another break, especially since he took on a couple episodes without me, so I figured, we'd trade off, keep it even. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Hatchet 3. Now, for those of you who haven't tuned in to the other two episodes, MJ and I took on the challenge of watching this beloved, very niche community type franchise. He and I have been to a lot of different horror conventions and different horror events, and we would always see this figure show up in a lot of people's merch, but he and I never really knew the backstory, or at least all too well. I think MJ had a little bit more knowledge than I did, so we just kind of one night decided to start watching the films. I think, funny enough, it was right before the trip that I had to Japan. So once we started the first movie, it was just kind of like as if we got hooked. We continued to watch the rest of the movies. The only movie that we were struggling to finish, ironically enough, was this movie that I'm covering today, the third one. So those of you who aren't too familiar, Hatchet 1 starts off with a group of college kids who go to a Mardi Gras event, are celebrating it there, and two of the bigger college group folks end up taking a boat tour. Boat tour goes sideways and everybody gets killed except for one person, Marybeth. Marybeth goes and tries to find people in town after surviving the first incident to help her bring her father's remains back, because in the first movie, her father was missing. And in that first movie, she finds her father's remains. The second movie, her main goal is to get her father's remains back so she can bury him. And throughout that process, she uncovers that the remains are no longer there, and everybody that she recruited along with another individual by the name of Dr. Zombie essentially got lured in hopes of putting Crowley to rest, because Dr. Zombie had a theory that he's, I think, what he called a roamer, meaning that an entity who can never find peace and will who will keep repeating the same night over and over again due to the tragedy and the devastation that he had right before passing. So this is the third movie. Third movie actually picks up on where Hatchet 2 left off, and Hatchet 2 closes with Marybeth bashing in Crowley's head. So, like I mentioned earlier, Hatchet 3 literally picks up right where the movie left off for Hatchet 2. I'm pretty sure they didn't take a break between filming those scenes. They just kind of decided to move or allocate this section of the film to the third one. And you see Crowley and Marybeth just continuing their final showdown. Marybeth gets hold of a shotgun and ends up blowing it to Crowley's face, but that, funny enough, actually doesn't keep Crowley down. He is regenerated once more. So he's soon stopped by a giant chainsaw. So essentially, while Marybeth and Crowley are fighting, I think because Crowley's head isn't fully recovered, he actually ends up picking Marybeth, trying to deliver that final blow, but she throws a punch at his face, and due to the fact that she was bashing in his head with whatever item she had, I think it was like some sort of hammer or some sort of hatchet, and it hadn't fully recovered, her arm gets stuck. So she just starts like moving her arm back and forth, almost like skull fucking him, but with her arm. And this leads to Crowley eventually letting go of Marybeth and taking a couple steps back and that results into him falling on a giant chainsaw that he actually used earlier in Hatchet 2. As we watch Crowley get literally split in half by said chainsaw, Marybeth seems to have killed Crowley for good. She is literally covered in all his blood because she's only a few steps away from Crowley since he just let her go, and gets bathed in it, almost like baptized in it, if you will. And this is where you can see the switch in Marybeth's head like go off, and she seems to almost like dissociate from everything. She grabs a fistful of Crowley's flesh and the shotgun and makes her way back to town. So this is where the credit scene starts to roll, and we kind of see the different limbs and body parts that are in Honey Island Swamp get displayed once more in the credit scene. A lot of callbacks to the first movie, a lot of callbacks to the second movie, and a lot of, I guess, call forwards to what we're going to see for the third movie, which we don't know at the time. So after all this, we cut to the police station, and we see Marybeth literally walk into the lobby. She is covered in blood, and she has a shotgun in her hand, which probably wasn't the best idea for her to do. She's still clutching onto Crowley's flesh, which we come to find out is actually his scalp. And again, this causes like everybody to freak out. So the police are dealing with standard Mardi Gras situations, drunk and disorderly conduct, prostitutes, people being too drunk in public areas, things like that, right? But Marybeth really puts everybody out of scare. So the sheriff literally tackles her down, holds her down, throws a shotgun out of her hand, and I guess his deputy picks up the piece of flesh that she was holding and comes to find out that it's a scalp himself. The sheriff declares that they're going to be arresting Marybeth, and around this time, this is where she keeps saying, I killed him, but doesn't really elaborate on who. So the sheriff tries to get the story, and when Marybeth brings up the name Victor Crowley, that's when everybody, not just the sheriff, but everybody in the station don't believe her. They see that she's covered in blood, so clearly it's not a ghost, or at least that's how they rationalize it. And the blood isn't hers. So because of all this, the sheriff decides to hold her until he can fully press the charges that he needs to, but she goes into holding. However, because she's covered in blood, she needs to get hosed down. And along this process, we see the sheriff actually walk into the area. And while the female cops are hosing down Danielle, or Marybeth, I should say. And it's really fucking weird, because in all honesty, I'm pretty sure no male individual is supposed to walk in when a female, be it if they're being processed for breaking the law, what have you, or anybody with like women genitalia, I should say, or who identify as a woman, should walk in on them being hosed down, especially if they're trying to clean off all the blood. And this is where he finally gets the final word of confirmation that this isn't Marybeth, this isn't her blood. Like, she has those cuts, she has no bruises, this is somebody else's blood. So I think they declare her almost like too dangerous to deal with, so they throw her into a cell. And she's being interrogated. And there's this very funny meta scene where the sheriff calls her story a contrived plot, but only an idiot would come up with that kind of plot that Marybeth is trying to not necessarily sell, but convince them. And funny enough, the guy in the background within that whole jail cell scene is actually Adam Green, the director of the movie. So you actually get to see him walk back and forth and be involved in the film. Very much like some of the more, not necessarily meta, but like smaller horror films, the directors and the producers become very hands-on, right? So once Marybeth tells her whole story and the sheriff doesn't believe her and is trying to find the actual charges to press on her, he's actually forced to leave because the cops he sent out to where Marybeth said all the death occurred are finding body after body at the swamp, Honey Island Swamp. So the paramedics actually arrive on the scene too. So all the first responders go. Firefighters, police, all kinds of police personnel, anybody that can be spared at least in the police station who is not covering Mardi Gras, along with the paramedics. I think the cops and the firefighters kind of throw in a smug line about how the paramedics are the last to respond, which is really weird. I think it's just a play on how a lot of people joke around that police are usually the last to respond, at least in the area that I'm in. So when the paramedics do arrive, they arrive by boat, and one of them actually looks exactly like the twin brothers that we see in the past movies. So Sean and the other individual, I forgot his name. But it's very obvious that it's supposed to be a gag character, if you will, or at least a gag actor. But around this time, everybody's getting affiliated with each other, introducing each other, and the emergency responders gather and decide that they're going to go out there and figure out what happened on Honey Island Swamp for real. So they start gathering all the body parts, making comments about how the person who cut up all the bodies is really messed up in the head. The sheriff is still very much sticking to the story that Marybeth has to be the one who's done the killing, because she's the one who showed up at the station, blood covered all over her, holding on to a piece of flesh along with a shotgun in her hand. The sheriff, who's named Sheriff Fowler, while he's giving the full debrief of the emergency responders, and literally trying to sell the story that Marybeth is the one, they just need to find the evidence for it, funny enough, gets interrupted by the SWAT captain, Hawes. So when Hawes comes into the picture, he actually takes control of the whole search and rescue team. He's trying to play the who has the bigger dick game with Sheriff Fowler, and the two of them are constantly switching back and forth about who's taking charge of the debriefing and how are they going to break the team apart, or at least go about conquering the Honey Island Swamp. So while this is all happening, the paramedics are taking the bodies to do a full evaluation on them before the forensic teams and the coroner comes in. And during this process, we see one of the body bags move in the background. So this is the part where the story, where the Asian actor, I don't have his name right now at the back of my mind, or on the tip of my tongue, I should say. If you watch the movie, you know who I'm talking about. He goes to his friend, who seems to be the person who processes a lot of the deceased bodies, and says, hey, in this bag right here, I seem to have a rather deformed individual. I figured you'd want to take a first look at this. So go ahead and do your evaluation, and I'll just bring you more bodies as they come. This is one of the few that I've seen that are somewhat fully intact. So his partner puts the bag down on the evaluation table, starts getting fully dressed to do the evaluation with the blue jacket, the hairnet, the masks, the gloves on, and we in the audience see the black body bag move in the background. So now we know for sure that if the formations, or deformations, I should say, weren't a big enough indicator, now with the bag moving, this for sure is a big indicator that is Crowley's body. So this medic, the one who's evaluating Crowley's body, ends up walking around, moving around, setting everything up that he needs to, and the next time he's back at his seat, finishing inputting whatever he is in the computer, getting ready to cut into the corpse, who we now know as Crowley, we see the body bag be completely empty. So before, it looked like it had a shape, now it's just completely flat. And now we know for sure whatever was in there is out. So not even 30 seconds later after this realization, at least for the audience members, we see this very same person get fried by a set of defibrillators. And we see Crowley hold the defibrillators on both sides of his head, press up against his ears, and just go for it. So around this point, we see a lot of blood pouring out of his ears, a lot of cool practical effects, and we know for a fact the defibrillators were probably placed at a very high frequency. And his head actually explodes, which I thought was really cool. And this is where the kills actually start getting really fucking exaggerated. So first movie was pretty insane. Second movie brought it up another level. Third movie was very much over the top. Not in a way that was displeasing, more so in a way that was just kind of like, this is really fucking entertaining. At least for me. So after this kill, this is where the movie really starts to pick up the pace, and the killings start to happen. The sheriff's team, along with the SWAT's team, make their way through Honey Island Swamp in hopes of finding the killer. everyone from the sheriff's department is freaking out because the corpses look a lot like what the ones in the Legends of Crowley say, which is that these people are literally look like they're torn apart by brute force, nothing more, nothing less. So obviously some weapons were used, but not the majority of the time. Maybe the weapons were used to do the initial killing, but then Crowley just kind of brought that in the final blow, or that final touch, if you will. However, people from the SWAT team aren't really taking it that seriously. They're almost viewing people from the sheriff's team to be like scaredy cats, or people who believe in ghost stories, or just like people that they shouldn't really be listening to, aside from one. I think she's this one chick who got transferred from Arizona, but this is one of her first missions outside of Arizona too. So she's entertaining the idea, but she doesn't really seem to be going with it, if you will. And because of the constant controversy, and then this one sheriff who I thought was rather comedic, or I guess police officer who was rather comedic, he has a whole bunch of weapons. I think he even has a fucking bazooka. And he even tells this newer SWAT member, like, hey, you should be afraid. Like, ghost stories are real, especially this one. Like, I've only been living in this town for a few years now, maybe 3 at most, and I have come to respect the legend of Crowley. And even if he's not real, I'm still prepared for him, right? So this is where the SWAT leader, Hawes, cuts in, stops him from continuing the story and freaking everybody else out, and makes a big speech about how the killer is out there and how they're hunting a person and not a ghost or something out of a ghost story. And funny enough, as he's delivering the speech, there's a scare that occurs midway through where people arm up and shoot in the direction of a bunch of bushes and small trees moving. You hear like the rustle of the leaves. We come to find out this is actually one of the medics who comes out, and only comes out because he hears the voices of people. And the only reason why he survived compared to the rest of his colleagues was because he was hiding under a bunch of dead bodies, passing as a dead person so Crowley himself wouldn't kill him. This is the same individual who it plays the character Sean, I think. He is the Asian actor that I was talking about earlier. So he tells the rest of the crew that Crowley is real, and that he watched him tore apart the rest of the search team that were going out there and looking for the bodies, and he's the sole survivor. Hawes does not believe him. He essentially just negates it all, says that this guy has to be delusional, he has to be working with the sheriff, like he's part of the town, he believes in the ghost stories, and calms everybody who was on the fence or anybody on the SWAT who was just starting to believe in Crowley to not. And I want to say not even 5 minutes later, Crowley actually shows up and squares off with Hawes. Hawes, and understandably so, puts up a bit of a fight in the beginning, but ultimately loses by Crowley taking his arm and shoving it through his midsection. This is kind of a tip of the hat, or I guess another fan fiction fight, if you will. So I did a little bit of research, and what I mean by that is this. I did a little bit of research, and I found out that the actor for Hawes is actually the actor for a couple of well-known horror films who got remakes. One of them being Friday the 13th, the one that released in 2009, along with the remake of Hills Have Eyes, 2006. So this was another dream fight, if you will. Very similar to the conceptual, like, Candyman versus Crowley fight that we had in movie 2. So Green seems to have an ongoing trend of satisfying his dream fights, or at least the horror community's dream fights, if you will. But after this big kill, if you will, the search party gets picked apart and they all panic. Crowley mops through a good portion of the SWAT team with their guns doing little to no damage. He also goes through a good portion of the sheriff's team, but mostly the SWAT team over the sheriff's, because with them being very skeptical and having a certain amount of respect for Crowley, to a degree, I should say, they somewhat know how to navigate around him better than the SWAT department. So, around this time, though, when we see, like, the search party getting picked apart, we flash back to Marybeth throughout this entire interaction. And throughout this interaction, like, throughout this side of the movie where everything is happening on Honey Island Swamp, there's also something still happening at the New Orleans Sheriff's Office. Marybeth is still very much in jail, in county, if you will, in her cell. And there's a reporter by the name of Amanda who is obsessed with Crowley to the point that she actually fucked up her career, I think a couple years back or a few months back. Like, anybody who hears her name knows that she did a certain piece, and that piece was a complete failure, if you will. She comes in, interviews Marybeth, tries to figure out her interactions with Crowley, almost like a light or a fire gets ignited under her whenever she finds out that Marybeth did have direct contact with Crowley, and really tries to figure out how Marybeth survived and how Crowley was like. So after all these questions, she essentially tells Marybeth that she is the best bet that Marybeth has to getting out of jail without all these charges being pressed against her. This isn't necessarily Marybeth's biggest concern, but it does catch her attention, if you will. I think Amanda also shares that she knows the reason why Crowley seems so fixated on Marybeth, if you will, which Marybeth does know, like, her father did cause the death of Crowley, but that Amanda can help Marybeth put Crowley to bed for good, or to rest for good. So eventually, once one of the deputies who stayed behind the police station starts hearing all the panicked voices of the SWAT members, of all the sheriff members, and hears Sheriff Fowler, or police members, I should say, the rest of the deputies and so on and so forth, Fowler says over the radio that he needs all hands on deck. So this deputy is left. Amanda hears it, and she strikes up a deal with the deputy, which the two of them have like a good amount of rapport. I'm assuming this guy has been in the police department as long as Amanda and Fowler were together for, because he keeps calling Amanda Mrs. Fowler, but Amanda keeps putting it out there that she got a divorce with Sheriff Fowler. So going back to the subject line, or I guess subject of the matter, I should say, Amanda overhears this radio calling for help and tells the deputy, hey, go ahead and take Marybeth out. I am going to take like full responsibility. I'll post her bail if she has bail. If not, then we're going to go ahead and take her out. And I know for a fact that she's going to help us get the killer, get Crowley, essentially. This deputy is still very much skeptical of the whole situation because he actually saw the downfall of Amanda and watched as not only Amanda try to rebuild herself, but also how Fowler tried to rebuild his name for himself, because clearly being married to Amanda caused a certain reputational kill for him as well, especially after the whole Crowley piece from a few months to a couple years back. We don't know the exact timeline, but we do know it was a little further back in Amanda's career, at least as far as reporting goes. So Amanda convinces the deputy to let Marybeth out, and they all end up going into one police car with Marybeth in the back, handcuffed, obviously, and Amanda being in the passenger seat while the deputy drives. Amanda convinces the deputy to go to an area just outside of New Orleans, close to where the swamps are, to visit Victor Crowley's uncle, who obviously until now we didn't know Crowley had any living relatives or anything. And she shares that the uncle of Crowley has something that is of significance to Crowley himself, and that they could use to one up essentially on the legend that is hunting them and haunting them. Amanda reveals that she thinks that Marybeth needs to be the one who delivers a special item, to which we come to find out that is actually Crowley's father's ashes, to Crowley himself, due to her father being the one who started the whole curse to begin with. So Amanda takes the time to explain that she tried to get Marybeth's father to do this himself, but he declined in a not so nice way, essentially saying that Amanda's father said, and I quote, "fuck off," and Amanda watched as Crowley continued to kill, or at least saw the evidence of Crowley continuing his killings. So once the trio make it to the uncle's house, Amanda and the cop are the ones who step out of the car and make their way over to the uncle's door. So there's a weird interaction between the trio, if you will. You can tell that the uncle is very much a racist country hick who always boasts about how he served in the war and doesn't like anybody who isn't white. Constantly makes jokes and not even jokes, but like comments about how the deputy is Black and how he doesn't trust people who are of ethnic color, how he went to war, how he's illiterate, how he fought for the freedoms of everybody, but not people like the deputy. Said, and I quote, unlike, like, didn't fight for people like you. And you see the two of them have this like sort of banter between each other. Obviously, during the time period that this movie was released, that could have been viewed as like humor. However, that kind of humor didn't necessarily age well with today's standards, I should say. So once that whole exchange occurs, and Amanda finally figures out her way into the uncle's house, she sees the urn and tells the uncle that she needs to borrow it. Obviously, the uncle is completely against this, so Amanda ends up taking the urn against his will. And the cop, funny enough, holds the uncle at gunpoint, kind of, but only because he tries to put his hands on Amanda. So, once they have the ashes, they make their way back to Marybeth, and this is where Amanda delivers the news to Marybeth about her key role in this whole process. Before the news is delivered, though, we actually get thrown back into the remaining 3 individuals for the search party. So Fowler, the Asian paramedic, and the SWAT transfer, who was from Arizona. So they're the only 3 that are left, and they make their way back to the paramedic boat that we saw originally in the beginning of the movie. And the 3 of them are desperately trying to stay alive. One by one, they start getting pulled out of the boat due to Crowley making a hole in one of the walls, and literally pulls them apart. But the way that he starts to kill is almost comedic, or at least in my eyes. So he gets, I think, a electrical sanding machine and sands away at the metal wall, because he's on the outside of the boat and this trio is on the inside of the boat, gets a hole, and then I guess he calls out Daddy at some point, and the drilling stops, or I guess the sanding stops. Fowler hears Amanda's voice and sticks his head out, and we see only like Fowler from the neck down or the shoulders down, and he's like shaking, screaming. We see blood slightly spraying through the small hole. And then all of a sudden, we see Fowler sit back, but when he sits back, he has no head. The 2 remaining survivors are there freaking out, and they decide that they're going to do their very best to not make any noise because they're convinced Crowley's out there waiting to kill them. I swear, not even 2 minutes go by, and the female SWAT member says that, you know what, she can't stay here, she can't wait for too long, because like they need to make it out, since Fowler, before he died, obviously made the call to the National Guard, telling them that they're under fire by a bunch of gunmen, which originally he actually stated it had to be Victor Crowley who was killing him, but revised the story because National Guard didn't ask for a repeat, if you will, or a clarification of what Fowler meant whenever he brought up the Crowley name. So good part on Fowler for, saying that it's a bunch of gunmen, because if he stuck to the story of it being Victor Crowley, I'm pretty sure National Security wouldn't have shown up. Or the National Guard wouldn't have shown up, I should say. Excuse me. So once Fowler is completely off and the female SWAT team member comes in, she says that she's going to stick her arm out in hopes of finding some sort of tool or weapon to kind of fight off Crowley, because, the hole's there and we all know he can reach his arm in. And she sticks her arm out in order to reach for something. Worst mistake of her life. So we see her like get pulled up against the frame of the door, and she's begging for the paramedic to help her out, to make sure she doesn't get killed, doesn't get pulled out through the hole. We see some tugs, and then like she screams out in pain, and we see some blood coming through, but not a lot. The paramedic is trying to save the SWAT member team, but at the same time trying to keep a safe distance as well. And then the camera pans to just the paramedic, and we don't see the SWAT member anymore, or at least as much. But in few glimpses, we come to catch on that she's being dragged through that small hole, and the paramedic is being splashed with her blood throughout this entire process. So once that kill is done, the paramedic just kind of stays still, doesn't move, doesn't say anything. And all of a sudden we cut back to Marybeth and her group. So they have finally, after getting the ashes, going out of town, driving back into town and making it close to Honey Island Swamp, make it to the property of the Crowleys at Honey Island Swamp. And we see that Amanda is still trying to convince Marybeth that she has to be the one who brings Crowley to peace, to bring the offering to Crowley, the ashes, and make sure that he takes it, finds his peace, and is able to rest. Because a repeater never finds peace. He's constantly living the final night of his life in constant fear and in constant fight or flight mode. She essentially, or at least I should say, Amanda hasn't fully convinced Marybeth quite just yet, but throws the ashes in her hands, calls out for Crowley. Crowley shows up, and he seems to, spontaneously shows up, I should say. So I'm assuming he, teleported from the boat over to where Marybeth and the rest of his group is. Or what the rest of her group is, I should say. Sorry. So, once he's there, Amanda is talking to Crowley, as if he's a coherent person, which I would like to think he is, and tells him how, she finally brought the very thing that he's waiting for, his father. Now he can finally find his peace. And Crowley seems to be taking interest into the urn. Now, mind you, Marybeth is close to Amanda, but Amanda seems to be taking initiative of the whole thing. However, I don't know what happens, either a twig snaps or Crowley just shows interest and then automatically switches to not. And he ends up lashing out and ends up killing Amanda. I think he actually ends up pulling off Amanda's head from her shoulders, very similar to Fowler, which I think is almost poetic, and then kills the deputy as well. So the only remaining person alive in Marybeth's group is Marybeth. And she's still in handcuffs, by the way, ever since she's been released from the holding cell, and is still trying to do her best to stay alive throughout this entire process. She grabs the urn once more and is constantly yelling out how, she's going to figure out a way to put him down for good. But I think it's the only tool that she has to try and keep herself safe. So once she grabs the urn, she throws the ashes at Crowley, but not without Crowley getting a big hit on Marybeth. So there's a tree next to the Crowley property that has a branch that's broken off, and the piece that's still attached to the tree is rather big and rather sharp. Crowley picks her up, turns her over to her side, and literally impales her on that broken branch piece, I should say, and tears a hole through her midsection. And she's literally hanging there at one point, just as if she decided to stab herself, I guess, or impale herself, literally floating. Her weight essentially causes this broken piece to break off of the tree and stay stuck in her, and Marybeth does her very best to collect herself and pick up the urn once more. This time, obviously, with a piece of wood stuck into her lower stomach area. She throws the urn in Crowley's direction, which in turn ends up breaking and the ashes spread all over his body. So first to his face and down. Crowley, out of nowhere, just fucking freezes. He stops. He seems to almost calm down, but not really. Falls to his knees, is still breathing heavily, but softly says, "Daddy," how he has been during the last 3 movies, and slowly starts melting from the head down. And it seems as if once the ashes make contact with Crowley, that's whenever he begins to literally melt away. Marybeth watches as he melts more and more until only the bones are left, and then finally collapses. She's doing her best to try to breathe through the entire process, trying to stay alive, trying to do whatever she can to make sure that she doesn't die. But at the same time, with that big piece of wood stuck in her stomach and blood starting to come out of her mouth and just the kind of wounds that she took throughout this entire process is catching up to her. We see searchlights all of a sudden show up and constantly cross across her body and across her face, and finally zeroes in on her face, but as the light gets brighter on Marybeth's face, her breathing becomes more labored. So the movie essentially ends with her taking one final breath, with them being more spaced out, but we don't see her fully die. So now it's up to the viewer to decide what happened. Because the searchlight was there, a lot of people would jump to the conclusion that Marybeth got found, and that she got sent to the medics. Now, whether she survived or not, that's up to you. Or it's a more poetic approach where Marybeth finally died and was looking into the light that was taking her up. Like, the helicopter noises are in the back. She wasn't really found. It was the light shining down from heaven, if you will, because she redeemed her family name. But it's up to you in how you decide whenever it comes to this movie. I took it in a more poetic way, if you will. I think MJ decided to take it in a more, not necessarily superficial, but like the way that it's shown in the movie. So she was found by the light by the helicopter searchlight, was found by the National Guard team, and who knows whether she survived or not. So this will be up to you to make your conclusion to the movie. All in all, I thought this movie was decent, but I don't think it's the best of the franchise. So, full transparency, I had to watch this movie, I think, like 3 times in order to retain the information, and MJ knows this. So it's not because I didn't like the movie, it's just I didn't think it was that memorable compared to the first 2. I had fallen asleep through my first watch through about like at the halfway point, and the second time I watched it all the way through, but I didn't remember. This time I was able to watch the movie in its entirety, but at the same time I had to make sure I was paying attention. I couldn't be distracted. I couldn't like get up and move around like how I normally do with movies. And unfortunately, because I have ADHD, that's something that I need to do often. So I waited until I was pretty tired and I could sit still for a long period of time and took on this movie and decided that, okay, I'm going to see exactly what happens to Crowley and what happens to Marybeth, at least Danielle Harris's version of Marybeth. As far as I know, she's only in the first 3 films, but I could be wrong with the continuations, like Victor Crowley and then the ones that have recently come out. But I've only seen the first 3. So, I don't know. I won't say it was bad. I thought it was pretty good. It still carried the same energy. It was pretty wacky, though, because, I mean, law enforcement, at least Louisiana's law enforcement, was really stupid and jumping into conclusions as far as Marybeth being the killer, and then Hawes, the SWAT leader, and the SWAT team themselves were pretty stupid in dealing with the situation. Like, they just made a joke out of the entire thing. I get it. Not everybody believes in ghosts, but at the same time, if like a whole group of people keep saying that, hey, you know, like these kills aren't natural, and you see evidence of people's body parts people's bodies being torn and spewed around in ways that most people usually don't kill them or display the body parts to be, you might want to entertain that idea. But aside from that, it was a pretty decent movie. Out of the 3 films, I would probably rank number 2 as my first, Hatchet 1 as the second, and then Hatchet 3 as the third. Again, not really taking away any scores or any, validation of the movie, but it just didn't carry that same charisma. I get it. This is Crowley's story finally coming to an end. This is Marybeth finally being able to redeem the name of her family, since her father was responsible for Crowley's death along with her uncle, her true uncle. But I don't know. Like I said, the movie wasn't that memorable for me. And in all honesty, when I was typing up the notes, I had to really sit back and think about what I remembered and what I didn't. And I'm pretty sure if I hadn't watched the movies 3 times, I wouldn't be able to retain the information as well as I did. I still enjoyed it, even though, you know, first time I fell asleep and second time I didn't really remember too much. But maybe you might have had a different idea of the film. But all in all, I would probably give this movie, at a scale of 1 to 10, probably like a 5.5, or a 6, depending. Practical effects are still really good. Kills are pretty much over the top. Keeps to the common trend. If anything, Green almost outdoes himself with the kills in this movie. You actually see like a pair of balls being hung up on a tree branch while the emergency response team is just starting to investigate Honey Island Swamp in its entirety. But it's not a movie that I would sit back and look to MJ or look to my friends and say, hey, let's play this. The first two, for sure. The third one, I would let them know they need to watch it on their own time. Not to say that I wouldn't put in the time to watch it again with them, but more so in the sense that I wouldn't want to be the ones to tell my friends, you need to go watch this right now. I can easily just kind of cut the movie off, or at least the franchise, I should say, off at movie 2 and come up with my own conclusions. But if you want something a little bit more concrete to the story of Crowley versus Marybeth, then 3 is there for you. But let me know what you thought. Let me know what you think of Hatchet, Hatchet 3, the entirety of the franchise, Victor Crowley, whether you think he deserves to be up there with the rest of the horror icons, or at least the ones that came out in the 2000s, or if he should still stay in that small little niche group that he's in right now. As time passes, though, I do see more and more merch of him release and people really speaking out about their love for Crowley. So I think he's really making a resurgence, if you will, very similar to Clowns from Outer Space and even the Lost Boys franchise and the characters that are in there. But if you enjoyed this episode, let me know. I know I did another solo one, but MJ will be with me the next time we record, and I want to say the next episode is going to be a really special one, so please be on the lookout for that. It's going to be something that MJ and I have planned out for a while and are really excited to actually share with you guys. But let me know what you thought of this episode. Hell, if anything, you can leave a comment, you can give us a rating, let us know how we're doing so far. This year, 2025, is going to be a big year for Slashes in Sync altogether, not just with content, but overall. MJ and I are really trying to make sure that we listen to you guys, bring what you guys want to hear, what you guys want to see us talk about and give our 2 cents, because honestly, we're just 2 horror geeks who get together and talk about our thoughts, and you guys take the time to actually listen to us, so thank you. But yeah, definitely let us know how you did, and let me know how I did with this episode, and if you want to hear any more. But I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care and enjoy your Tuesday.